Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. It's a lot of fun doing this, and one of the things that I enjoy doing is introducing you to people that give me joy and that are part of my circle of love. One of my best friends is here with us today, and that would be Lisa, who I knew as Lisa Armijo when she was a college student at Arizona State when I was a pastor there. And she went on to marry Mr. Zarita. So now she's Lisa Armijo Zarita. She's our guest today. So tell everybody hello, would you?
Yeah, Father Nathan, so glad to be here and super excited about your podcast and your journey. I think we've known each other how long? 25 years, something
25, yeah,
crazy
right,
like
right around there, I should think, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just really excited to see you and your new beginnings. So happy to be here.
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted Lisa to be on the podcast was we have a lot of different overlapping roles in our lives and friendship, but she is one of the people that I turned to years ago to help me do the Afterlife interrupted work, the work of helping souls who come in the night, show me their trauma, how they died, moving through that process and helping them move along. Lisa was somebody that I trusted, that I could take that story to and say, hey, this is what happens. I need some assistance. Do you think you would be willing to at least try that out? I know you to be a pretty fearless person. I wasn't afraid to ask you at least, and neither were you afraid to give it a try and get started with it. So later in this program, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I wanted people to have a feel for who you are. And so I thought maybe it'd be best if you just sounded off for a few minutes about a little of your own story.
Well, I am a mother, and of course, I've been married 14 years, but we have a beautiful, wonderful daughter who's 10. And I am also a business consultant, which sounds very formal. Basically, people hire me to try to bring an area of expertise. I do a lot of government work, I do a lot of research and development, and I do what I can to try to build communities, develop programs or processes or organizations to meet the needs of the people they're trying to serve. So I go in and I talk with a lot of folks, boots on the ground, gathering data and research and information, and then I make sense of it and spit it back out, try to see what can be done really for people to better their lives and to flow and to be thriving members of whatever community they are in.
And when you're doing that for city councils or city planning teams and so on, they're used to having people advocate adversarially for a point of view against another point of view in public policy. And I think one of the things I think you do so well is you help people be affirming of a value and saying why it's important and good and true without necessarily trying to conquer or defeat another point of view, how to help people bring to the table goodness and maybe recognize goodness in somebody that has an opposing point of view. Would you say that so?
Yes, and I think that's why I'm grateful for you and your friendship because I see that in your preaching and in your life of what you do naturally. And I've learned from you about that. But I think that, unity, I am more of a unitive thinker and I appreciate interfacing and interacting with a lot of different folks from all walks of life and backgrounds and faiths. I truly think I can learn from each person or each interaction I'm involved with. I do try to approach it with what's the common ground? Where is the common solution? Are there any instances where we intervene? Or are there instances where we just have to be respectful and say, agree to disagree, but then come together and let's look at the greater picture for the greater good?
Mm-hmm. Now, when we first met, I was the pastor at All Saints Catholic Newman Center at Arizona State University. And you did undergraduate work in Tucson, didn't you? Is that the way it worked, or was it the other way around? You were at both schools.
Yeah, I was at both schools. So I get to root for both U of A and ASU, but I was an undergrad at U of A, and then that's where I got introduced to Dominicans,
And that's
really.
in Tucson, where I live now, for people that don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then I went to grad school. So I went directly from a bachelor's into a doctorate program at ASU. That's where I met you and met the beautiful Newman community, and was able to further solidify my faith. I've grown up Catholic all my life. My grandma and my grandfather were incredible role models. They raised me until I was 5. My mother died when I was very young. So I had the benefit of grandparents being present. And so they were just wonderful examples of faith. I still have Catholic prayers, I think, that are this tall, that are in Spanish, right? And they're tattered, that my grandmother used to say every day. I was raised with a deep faith and was able to kind of just live that out a little more fully with some of the campuses that you directed.
I've always admired that about you because you had shared with me early on that your mother had died when you were very small. And the young woman that you were as I met you were just so radiant and so kind and compassionate towards other people. It just looked like whatever that experience was of losing your mother young and being loved by other people in her stead, they produced a beautiful young woman.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't write the script. I certainly would have loved to have my mom around, and I feel like she is, though. She's present and she's wishing me well. And in the work I do too, I've walked with a lot of people who've gone through suffering of different kinds. And so losses like that, like the death of a mother very young, or different sufferings through life, right? That people go through in different degrees. It helped me be a little more compassionate and see points of view that I wouldn't normally have seen.
Well, tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about you're kind of minding your business. You're this student who's getting her advanced degrees and living the life and so on. And then you began to feel what Catholics sometimes call a vocation, a calling to stop what you're doing and do something else. What was that like?
I was in my doctorate program at ASU, and I was happy as can be. I was with a wonderful roommate and teaching at ASU, and near the end of my program. And then somebody said, you need to get connected with this project that's going on. And I said, okay. People are trying to create a house of hospitality, essentially for people that were homeless. And so that was intriguing to me, because I always, when I met people that were more vulnerable in vulnerable situations, I always had the sense of what is behind that? What's their story? What is something that they can draw from? Move them through whatever situation that they're in. And so that intrigued me about the homelessness.
But you also narrowed the mission down to not just any house of hospitality, but providing a home for pregnant women on the streets.
And that was really important, because I think everybody has a next step to give. I don't think in faith that God leaves anybody for naught. And I've seen that in the work that you've done too. It was particularly important that we open up a home for people in really tough circumstances, and these happen to be pregnant women at the time. There were several homeless shelters, but you can imagine that a mom who is with a child has very different needs, and even a woman on the streets has very different needs. And so we saw a need and a niche and decided to go that route.
And you helped homeless pregnant women who were no longer homeless because you provided a home for them become a family to one another while they were moving through their pregnancies. I remember being in the house, holding tiny babies, and then somebody else would be out to here and talking about the due dates and doctor's appointments and job training and all of that. It was really remarkable what you guys put together, and just figured it out one step at a time. Do you remember when we
Thank
were at
you.
that pizza parlor just down the street from the Newman Center, kind of sketching it out on a napkin? What's this going to look like? Um, I remember saying,
I
you
do
might
remember.
you might find the mission is easier. It's the living together that's the hard part. Being in close quarters with other
Yes. Yeah.
people, morning, noon, and night is can be the harder part.
Oh
Anybody that's
my
had a
gosh.
roommate might appreciate that.
Right. And these were not chosen roommates, right? These were five of us that we didn't know much about each other. And so living in community certainly stretches our emotional fabric. And, one of the things that I loved about the whole House of Hospitality idea is that the inclusion of the people in the process. So we didn't know we were going to call it Maggie's Place. It was named after Mary Magdalene, of course. But I remember meeting with a group of people that were currently homeless and getting their input because we don't have all the answers, certainly not 20 something, but even if we were 50 something, we've never lived on the streets. And so, getting input from them, what their needs are, how can we truly be welcoming? We lived with the people that we served. And, 22 years later, so grateful that people have taken it on. It really was a community effort, and God at work interweaving. And you were our spiritual director for it in the early days, I know.
Right.
So you helped a lot with that guidance.
Well, I'm doing this podcast now with Joyful Friar as its name, and it's joyful memories for me. Just thinking back on that time that I was leading a capital campaign that ended up raising $6 million, and none of us knew how to do that. You didn't know how to do what you were doing, but we were just kind of living on the edge, trusting the Holy Spirit to help us to figure out what we didn't know. And one of the ways to do that is to ask. And you listened. You listened to people. You asked them questions, and you built out. It wasn't just your dream or any even the five founders. It ended up being the dream of lots of different people. Before we go on to the work that we do together now, I just have that one really happy memory that I thought I'd share with everybody of the volleyball game at the picnic. You remember that?
I didn't remember it until you brought it up.
For all of you that are watching and listening, we were having an end of the year, college student picnic with all the volunteers, because a Newman Center, a Catholic campus ministry center at a big university, isn't just 20-year-olds. It's professors and elders and people that just love the place and want to be around it. And we were having this big picnic, and somebody put together the idea ahead of time for a volleyball tournament. So organizing teams and creating like March Madness, make brackets where this one would advance and play that one and so on. And I just remember the staff put together a team, but we were mostly just too old to really compete. And we needed another player, and you came on as our ringer. You're a very good athlete. And we called ourselves the staff infection. And the staff infection won a couple of games. We advanced. We weren't out in the first round. But I remember the bump set spike thing. You were a good spiker. Because this thing is called joyful, I think one of the ways to lead a joyful life is to actively call to mind joyful moments in your life and bring them back into the present. I have this on my desk. Can you see that picture?
Oh, it's your mom.
It's
Yeah.
my mom. We went to the World Series together in 2005. We're Houston Astros fans. Can you see the hat in the background there? The product placement.
I saw. Yes, I do.
I didn't
Oh,
want it to be too big
okay.
because it annoys people that people don't like us. But anyway, it gives.
Come on, Father. Where's your Dallas? Where's your Dallas hat? I mean, we
It's
can like
it's out in the
hide
car.
our heads.
We're both Cowboys fans. That's what we share.
Okay.
That's a lot that we. But part of the reason I love those kind of sports, is because they do create community. When I was in the airport the other day, and there was somebody wearing Astro gear, and that created a bond just because we have that in common. And I love seeing a stadium full of people happy and excited about the same thing at the same time. That's always been a part of my life. Tell me from your point of view how you remember getting involved in this work. I don't even remember how I asked you.
You had a gift, I knew from very early on, to communicate with people who had passed, and even saints and so forth. I remember during different spiritual direction sessions, there came through, your gift came through. You were leading a group of students, you were in a different part of your ministry, and so you inserted it in the time and place that it was helpful for folks to kind of learn and grow. So I knew you had this gift of communicating with people in a way that not everybody does. And I remember we were meeting, and you said, well, how about we try this? I've been having some people come in. Would you like to try to help? And so afterwards, I had to sit for a minute and really just kind of pray and think about, what happened, because it was very natural, and never throughout any of the process as a prayer partner has it been anything other than that. I mean, in a lot of sense, it's what I do in this area of work. I talk with people, and I approach them, and I listen, and I try to hear what the needs are, and then try to move through processes for them. This is very similar work, of a different kind, but it's very similar. And I remember that it just kind of came about very naturally. It always just felt like something that was life-giving, and something that was healing and helpful, and really just something beautiful, a beautiful
Well,
ministry.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit and describe our process, just because there could be
Yes.
viewers and listeners for whom this is not familiar. In short, about 25 years ago, I was on a retreat with lay Dominicans. You're a lay Dominican. I don't think you were at the time, but you've become one since.
Yes.
And during the night on a retreat, I was asleep, and I had a dream that I felt like was a contact dream from a person who had been through a traumatic death. I sometimes compare it to the experience of priests who have to have a pager on the nightstand in case there's a hospital emergency. Well, this was being called during the night, but not by the hospital. It was somebody that was calling out and wanting my attention. I wrote it down. I got with a prayer partner. We didn't know what we were doing exactly, but we prayed through it that day. And he was able to speak in that case through my partner. We protect ourselves in prayer first, and we engaged. His name was Ray, and we've talked about him on an earlier episode or episodes in this series. We ask them what they want and how we can help them get it, which is to move from a level of an initial afterlife level that seems to be designed just for traumatized persons, to give them what they need and get them to a level of peace, security, readiness to take on larger things. Very, very much parallels what you were doing in Maggie's place, providing an environment where people could heal, calm down, anticipate, and get excited about a future that was not very much in the distance, and then help them move into it.
In a very dignified way, and that's what's remarkable about the people that you interface with, right? It's a very dignified way. It's never shaming, it's never judgmental. It's been very loving, very dignified.
I think so. And you've done a number of these. Do you have one or two that stand out in your mind? These people are so delightful to get to know, and some of them kind of stay in our hearts after we've helped them along.
They do, and the cluster stories, I think, have been particularly remarkable. I think of Bridget, that was in your book too, and she was a young girl.
Tell
And
everybody what a cluster is.
yes, yes. So a cluster is when there is a group of people that are crossing at the same time, which that in and of itself is a little bit of a miracle, right? But it's people that have similar circumstances, maybe not exactly the same. In this instance, it was people who fell, who had some sort of fall incident, and they were led by Bridget, who is a young kid. And so she was, I mean, I was thinking, isn't that just how things work with faith, right? It was led by a young child, and she led a group of adults who were afraid to move. And I think there were 20 to 25 people, I think.
And she was about the age of Catalina, your daughter.
She was. So, as a mom, to be able to talk with her, and connect in that way. And she was just that was a beautiful piece. And even the ones that perhaps are, have some more tragedy in them, a young child is, just love, right? They're just love. But some of the ones with suicide, I know that I did a couple of those with you, and those, the folks were in a darker place, certainly. But what was remarkable about that is they never were left alone, and they always loved, even in their process, and
Yes.
encouraged to go to the next step, right?
Let's take each of those individually. I'm remembering now, Bridget, They had all died of a fall. She was in this cluster of people, and she says, we all feel like we're at the bottom because we fell. And so
Yes.
the way that we often use, we talk about highs, emotional highs and lows, and that they felt low because they died falling and were on the bottom. That's the way she put it as a 10-year-old. The way I recall it, she was very reluctant to be the spokesperson. Do you remember that?
She was. In fact, she said, well, if and then what it came down to is if she could help, like it was the helping, it was showing compassion for another and getting herself out of, her spot that she was a little bit kind of stuck in. That kind of helped her move forward because she felt like, well, if I can be of help, then I will. It's kind of like moving past suffering into that compassion.
I'm only doing this because somebody asked me to. She was just real sweet that way.
I think that's how the spirit works a little bit, right? Like sometimes you're asked to do stuff, the calling. You mentioned Maggie's place, but I think your listeners too, each, I think God, faith, higher power, however your listeners, contrive that they are each called to a certain service. They're each called to a certain piece that only they can play.
You just say yes and then see what happens. She's in Bridget's story is in book 2. I was just trying to remember which. There's 2 of these books in this series. She sized up as a 10-year-old that the thing that these people all have in common is they fell and they stay down and sad. And she said, we need to get them to realize that they don't have bones that could break anymore. They don't have bodies that will leak blood if they get cut. She had to help them look at their current circumstance and say, look, if you fell now, it wouldn't even hurt. Remember?
Yeah, yeah, it's a shift in perspective, right? It's just a slight shift.
And she could do it from such an authentic point of view because she had died of a fall from a tree. But she said every kid knows that when you climb a tree, there's some adult there saying, get down from there or you'll fall. Children always know that climbing things
Right,
could lead to a fall,
right.
and hers did. And she said, and I died. But then she thought, you know what? You're not dead. Do you remember the rest of it?
Yeah, you're just bouncy.
You're just bouncy. You're not dead. You're just bouncy. And so
Right.
she, in the afterlife, she decided to put together like a, a bouncy house, like at a children's party. And she had adults in the afterlife falling and laughing and jumping up and falling again. I remember she talked a little bit about going to an amusement park and how sometimes adults can just be so dull. And instead of going on the roller coaster, they sit on the bench and watch. She was trying to say to them, get over here and bounce. This is where the fun is.
Yeah, she was an epitome of joyful hope, right? And kind of getting people to get outside of themselves, and move forward. And I think that's, sometimes we have to do that when following what we should be, right? Like sometimes it's a simple yes, and then other times it's all right. I'm willing, I'm ready, but I need to buckle up and I may take one step forward and 2 steps back, but I'm willing and ready and hopeful. And she led the way with that.
And you mentioned that she was compassionate. I love that word. It means to suffer with. And
Hmm.
she had the credentials because she died in a fall. She suffered it. And but she turned her suffering in not into bitterness or even isolation. She turned it into compassion. Do you remember how she said there are people of all ages here because little kids can fall and old people can fall. Everybody in between can die of a fall. So this place has lots of fallers in it, but some of them are children without a parent and some are parents who left behind children. And do you remember how she said, I would ask them, would you just go sit by that little child over there and talk to them for a little bit? She she paired people up.
Yeah, she was a
Yeah.
leader at 10, a leader at 10. It was beautiful.
Well, that sounds to me like the work that you've done in community organizing, where you get people who are on opposite sides of the room and say, "Hey, you've got this, and they need that. Could you guys get together?" Um, well, then you also mentioned the suicides. Were you involved directly in helping with one of those crossings, or both of them? I guess.
Yeah, in 2 of them actually, and it was quite remarkable. I think they came the night before.
Right, all the way at the end of book 2.
Yes,
That
yes.
was
Yeah, and I know you were very careful to, how to speak about that, because, suicide is such a traumatic, sensitive topic. It's so layered, and the hope was that in putting those stories in is to really bring about some healing for some folks that maybe had others that had gone through that circumstance.
And those two, what they were, a young woman and a man, that each of whom had died decades and decades ago. Uh,
Yeah, it was
that
interesting.
that made it easier for me to include those stories because I don't include them without their permission. And they
Right,
both agreed that their deaths had occurred so far back in time now that reading about it in a book would not rip open a wound, that
right.
they were mostly an old photograph. I think that's what one of them said. Hardly anybody here would still remember me except as an old photograph. Well, tell me a little bit about Joyful Hope and how you cultivate it, or how do you have any hacks, tips, tricks about how to be a joyful, hopeful person, or do you just wake up that way?
I don't. But I think it is, well, first of all, it helps to be around joyful people. So I'm grateful for that. But I think for me, joyful hope is deliberately leaving space for God to fill and create beginnings for each of us to embrace that are even better than what we could imagine. And so that that life can actually be better than what we expect. And it's not a Pollyanna view, because there is pain and disappointment and heartache, of course. But joyful hope is that deep trust that with God's help, we can all find the incredible capacity to give back and transcend in magnifying love and service. And I guess that's why I like your Afterlife Interrupted story so much, is because there's glimmers of that ring through each of those stories. And I am an idealist, so I was going through my old paperwork in my 20s, right? And so at the bottom of every email, I had Helen Keller's tagline. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this, but I had never stopped trying. This quote was on every email: never stop trying to uncover the secrets of the stars, sail to uncharted lands, or open a new heaven to the human spirit. And so that was the tagline on every email as a grad student. I'm sure people thought, wow, this one is full of it,
Maybe
but
not.
but in looking at that, it made me laugh and smile. And it's just a reminder to keep some of that idealism, even when there is suffering and trauma, even that walking with people in that severe trauma, that it's in the end, and often you don't see it right at that time. You have to wait for it, right? But eventually, that it's that core belief that even amidst the suffering, that eventually those dark circumstances really do get turned for good. And it's keeping that gratitude for what the blessings are, even when life isn't so shiny. um, that for me is joyful hope.
I remember when I first got to ASU in '94, the Newman Center there was considered in our Dominican province our flagship. It was, the biggest, greatest thing going, and I got there and it was broke. It was doing all this great work, and all the bills were paid late and stuff, and the administrative part of it was not at all healthy. And I remember having to look at a stack of bills that were past due and that had penalties on them and stuff. I never lived that way. You know, I always paid. I didn't buy a thing until I could pay for it. And I was taught that.
Right.
But I had to look at a stack of unpaid bills and say, well, we've got an abundance of unpaid bills. But scarcity or abundance, that's one of my things. Wherever Jesus goes, there's abundance. And right here, we have an abundance of unpaid bills. So how are we going to turn that into joyful hope? Well, we'll get started. And, you remember how in the 6th chapter of John's Gospel, there's a starving crowd coming towards Jesus. And the fact that they're coming toward him is a great thing. But some of his
Yes.
disciples just see a
Yes.
problem, and even says, tell them to go away. So go get themselves something to eat. And they're all college students, or they're at least disciples, which means student. And he says to them, he said, in order to test them, he said, feed them yourselves. And
Mhm.
remember, they got all mouthy and stuff. And then he says, well, what do you have? Go and see. And that's when Andrew, one of my favorite saints, says, well, there's a kid here with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what good could that be? Well, and then Jesus just says, get them to sit down, you know, and then we'll bless the food. And I just feel like you and I lived that. We walked on water in those years, and I think we're still doing it. You know, we're still, and so are many of the people that we help.
Yeah, and so are many of your listeners, because I don't think we take the time sometimes to recognize there are little miracles, or people are doing just amazing, beautiful things in our midst. And it really to focus on that.
You see a little bit more of it than others do, because for those of you watching and listening, Lisa volunteers a lot for me, and I had to learn how to save a document, you know, how to turn on Zoom. I got through all of my education on a typewriter, so all of this technology has come to me, you know, step by step, slowly. And Lisa took on the job of creating my email distribution list, so that, and how to use MailChimp to send a message to everybody and so on. So I often, when listeners and viewers or people that learn with me write with a problem, a challenge, a broken heart, or whatnot, I forward things to her so that they get included on a list. And because you're so confidential, I don't feel that I'm breaking a trust. Um, but you sometimes see the hearts of people that have been broken by life or something, that end up being a part of our work.
So with the pastoral counsel that you do, I see just a very small glimmer of it, because of course you go into much greater depth in your counsel, in your personal counsel. But in reflecting on that, it's amazing, first of all, that you going from a typewriter to now the technology, and you're able to use your ministry. I mean, really, because they are people that are coming from 13 different countries at least. And, that is just God at work. And people are trusting, and they're turning to you for guidance. And, often, they're trying to find faith. Sometimes they're seeking faith in a general way, or sometimes it's because they've been rocked by a tragedy, or they're struggling to find hope or make sense of stuff. And I love the fact that it's people across the board. So some are church folks, other have lost their faith in organized religion. Some have even had spiritual experiences. Since doing this work with you, it's become more evident that, well, there's a lot more people that have these unique spiritual experiences, and they're looking for someone trustworthy to really talk to them about it. And I know your counsel is a very kind one, and that's why people approach you, because you are non-judgmental, and you still tell people the truth about what can be done to move them to the next step. But you really are a healing light. And I don't think it was any sort of surprise that this ministry really took off during COVID, when we all needed a little bit of that healing. I know that you refer to scripture and prayer, and however you speak with them, right? Because each person's an individual.
Yes.
I know your goal is to just help people soak up God's love, encouraging them to grow in faith and love. And it's like, what more can we hope for, right? To move past fears, and just help people get to that peaceful present.
Yeah, and for me, part of it is just helping people uh, define the task of
Mhm.
finding God is sometimes what they're doing. And they can start with an idea that God is invisible or far away, or the task seems impossible or daunting, and just try to reframe it and say, accept that God's everywhere and you're somewhere. That means you're already inside God. That's why God can be hard to see. Can the child in the womb see the mother?
Right.
No.
No.
No, but that doesn't need to, because it's provided for. And one of these days, it'll have that vision. But that's part of Joyful Hope. But for right now, enjoy being held, enjoy being nurtured, enjoy the opportunity to grow. Though later there'll be time for other things, but enjoy what's possible right now, even if you have to do with a broken heart. I've been brokenhearted
Yeah.
before. You have to move through it.
And yeah, and that they're loved and that they have people around them, constantly, God and angels and saints and, just all sorts of people that are wanting the good, for them. And I think an approach of God as love, I've never heard you have another approach with faith than that. And I've really appreciated in the
It's the
friendship with.
whole thing. It's the whole thing. Well, let's conclude with, but we're thinking when you were part of the advisory team about how to put together a podcast, I got advice from lots of different directions. One of the things we were told was don't launch until you have about 10 shows already recorded, so that you don't put yourself on some sort of hamster wheel where you're having to chase to keep up with the goal that you set. So we've done that. We have a bunch of shows recorded, and we're where we think this one will go live on All Saints Day, or at least right about that time, November 1st or November 2nd, All Souls Day. So we thought it might be fun just to end with who's a friend of yours among the saints? Who's somebody you love among the saints?
It's hard to pick just one.
Yes, you only have one child, so you don't have to choose your favorite child, but you'd have to choose your favorite saint right this second.
Oh, I don't know, Father. I don't know if I could choose for. Okay, I'm gonna say them very quickly, but well, Mary Magdalene is huge just for her love and leadership. I can't choose one. I gotta say
Okay.
Saint Catherine of Siena as well, because I think that she gives the epitome of what each of us are called for. Because when we are doing what we are meant to do, we will set the world on fire. I think Mother Teresa trying to leave people a little better than where they were upon meeting them, and Dorothy Day, she's not canonized, but she built community in incredibly unique ways. You were a pastor at All Saints Newman Center, and I know you call on lots of saints, so you choose who are
Well,
yours.
but you I don't know if you remember, but the day I arrived at All Saints Newman Center at Arizona State, I left St. Andrews at UC Riverside.
Okay.
And I had a real big crisis in my ministry, and consequently in the rest of my life during that time. And I went to a spiritual director who asked, "What's the name of your church?" And I said, "St. Andrews." And he said, "Do you ever pray to him?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, do you ever pray to your guardian angel?" "No, I quit when I was about 10." And he said, "Well, that's where we'll start." One of the issues was we were broke and I couldn't afford much of anything. And he said, "Your guardian angel and St. Andrew will both work for no pay." They'll be members of your staff if you, they'll be members of your unpaid staff if you commit to including them in your process, in your thinking, in your acting. I have the same planner. Talk about old school. I don't use a computer for my scheduling. I have a planner.
I got one of those too. I got one of those too.
And
yep,
I just
right
find
there.
even with all the technology, I don't have to go from screen to screen. I can just open my book and I know where things are, and I don't have to remember what button to push to make it. Something disappears, and then you don't know how to get it to come back. Anyway, Andrew sat with this calendar with me day after day, morning after morning, when I was pastor at St. Andrews in my early 30s. And I looked like the altar boy, and they used to tease me that I looked too young for the job. I got in the habit of meeting with St. Andrew every morning. My spiritual director said he was there before you were. Our churches are not named for a saint because the building needs a name. The community needs a patron. And you and he are both pastors of that place in different ways. And if you acknowledge that and you ask him to be actively a part, he will co-pastor with you. And so I just got busy, and I didn't hear or see a whole lot of stuff. I just trusted that eventually he did kind of show up to me. That's for another show. But I just trusted that, okay, Andrew, come sit by me and let's go over the calendar. This is what we need to do today. Here are the challenges, here, whatever. And then when I learned that I was going to be made the pastor of not a church that wasn't named for one saint, but for all saints, I just thought, oh my God, this is going to be a piece of cake. I had one saint that I can rely on. Now I get all of them. So I got to be the pastor of all saints, which I just felt like was just such an easy job.
Just appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have plenty of other saint friends too, but I'll keep it at that for right now. So you have any message on the way out of this little call that you want to say to everybody, or?
So I know that one of the pieces of your podcast is to talk about spirituality. And so I think that is something that is at its best. Spirituality is connecting with another and helping each other become the best versions of who God intended us to be. And so as I think about that and what spirituality is, I think it's a mixture of a lot of stuff. So it's being open to stretching our emotional fabric. It's being a continuous student, welcoming ongoing growth, never thinking we have all the answers. It's asking for forgiveness and forgiving others. I think the nitty gritty of it is purposefully, intentionally, deliberately seeking to understand what God's role is for each of us, because we each have a special role that no one else can do in this whole piece we call life. And it's service that comes from giving. It's a daily, continuous strengthening of spiritual connection. It's living in the today with the best opportunities that the infinite God reveals to our finite selves. I think, as we talked about, spirituality is also moving past the noise of division and sprinkling kindness and unity. And even imperfectly, because we don't have to do it right, because God can do for us what we can't do for ourselves, right? But it's trusting the process, letting go again and again, and keeping, even in a small way, a glimmer of hope that all things can truly be turned out and worked for the good. And that God really does write a script for us that will end in far more inspiring ways than any of us could write.
And you know what? I like how you mispronounced imperfectly.
Right.
You imperfectly pronounced imperfectly.
I am perfectly, because we don't have to get it. That's exactly right. And we
And
don't have
because
to get
we
it.
don't, we don't. And on this little show, we have the
No, you
opportunity
don't.
for our helper Chantel to go back and edit things. But I think life can be edited too, and I think that's part of what we do in the Afterlife Interrupted process. People get to change their story. Okay, yeah, I died in a fall, or I died in a car crash, but so what? You know, I'm getting over it, and I'm going on with it, and editing their story, going
Yeah,
on, having a different story to
you
tell.
do. And you never have to stay in that story. You don't have to stay in the story. And that's what I think you do spiritually in your counsel, is you teach people to shift. You teach people to get out of whatever their yuck is, right? I mean, God wants us to be in any yuck or blame or shame or forgiveness, not forgiving yourself or not forgiving others. God wants us to move past that.
And if you
Yeah,
can't do that
absolutely.
this minute, you and neither one of you or I are Pollyanna-ish, and some people are brokenhearted today because their heart just broke, and it will take time to
Absolutely.
mend. So it's not a matter of us just chirping on about joy, uh,
No.
but waiting in joyful hope. If you can't be as joyful as you wish you were today, can you make a step in that direction, or can you step away from something that sucks away your joy, and make a move, do something?
Absolutely.
And often that's by
I
serving
even
somebody else. Yeah. Would it be okay if people wanted to be in touch with you if they just move through my website and ask you a question or make a
sure.
comment or something? So that the way to do that, folks, is just my website is nathan-castle.com, nathan-castle.com. Go to the contact tab, and it'll bring up a little form to fill out. I like to know where you are in case I want to be in touch with you. I don't want to call you in the middle of the night, that kind of thing. Uh, and just write a message, and if it's something that I can help you with or that Lisa could, we're at your service.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful. And I know just through the ministry you do, there's been incredible people coming forward to meet from. So just super grateful to be a part of your process, and can't wait to see where your other new beginnings take off, Father Nathan.
Well, it's a wild ride, isn't it? And you've been along for a long part of it. So thanks for being a part of this today. That's it for this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. Join us next time for something fun and joyful. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button. See you next time. God bless.